back to the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, brought to you by Tacticam. Tacticam is by far the easiest way to begin filming your hunts. Whether it's the budget-friendly solo or the 4K 5.0, Tacticam has something for everyone. Check them out at tacticam.com. We're also brought to you by Spartan Forge. Spartan Forge uses artificial intelligence to track deer. So they're using military-grade intelligence, algorithms, science, all the things that we don't necessarily equate to hunting, and we're using them to track wild animals. So they're using radio deer studies, weather, historic, car deer accidents, insurance company information, social media, all of that, those types of things, they're using to predict deer movement in each different region. So deer in the south move differently than the deer in the northeast than they do in the Midwest. And all of these things, they've got millions, billions, if not trillions of data points to corroborate all of this. And so what they're doing is they're patterning these deer and saying, in these conditions, they move in these areas. And that is available now on an app. So Spartan Forge, you can go to spartanforge.ai and you can take a look at that. There's a 14-day free trial, and you can get 25% off when you decide to subscribe to this by using code BOWHUNTER. Now, what that does is there's a lot of big things in the works. We talk about it a little bit at the end of this podcast, but it actually there's a follow-on. Once the data gets to a certain point, they're going to be able to not only say when, but exactly where or in these areas. This is where you're going to want to be. And then the software is increasing dramatically as well. And what that does by signing up now locks in the price, so you get grandfathered in. But you can get 25% off the price right now and keep that price by using code BOWHUNTER. And that's at spartanforge.ai. So real quick, for everybody that is still listening on the intro and hasn't passed by this, we're giving away a bow. We're giving away a bow not to our Patreons. They're certainly entered to win. You know, they have more entries to win, but anybody can win this bow. We're giving away a Bowtech Carbon Zion. We're not getting it from Bowtech. We're getting it with help from our local shop, Johnson's Great Outdoors. But this is like coming out of our pocket. So our bow hunting podcast, we decided that we wanted to give back to the listener, and we're giving away this bow. John's going to set it up. We're going to document the whole thing. We've got one of the new HHA single pin Tetra sights on there. HHA rest is going to be completely set up and ready to go. 60 pounds, right-handed. All you got to do is sign up to win. So you can go to our website, bowhunterchroniclespodcast.com. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a thing that says Enter to Win. That's all you got to do. If you're on our Instagram, if you click the link in our bio, the top one says Win a Bowtech Carbon Zion. That's all you got to do. You know, you got to be in the U.S. We're not shipping it out of the country, but we're giving that away when we're up at the Total Archery Challenge. You don't got to be there to win it. But we're just going to go live at our cookout and give it away. So, like I said, that doesn't have anything to do with our Patreon giveaways, anything like that. That's just for you, the listener. And right now, you know, you got plenty of time until June, but there's going to be other ways additionally to win through some of the other giveaways and things that we're doing as well. But there's 119 people entered. So those are incredible odds, especially if you're a Patreon, because there's only 79 Patreons. So there's like 40 people outside of Patreon. Some of our Patreons have entered multiple times. So there's an excellent opportunity to win an incredible bow. It's the same bow that I'm going to be shooting this year. You know, we didn't just say, what's the cheapest bow that we can find? This is a bow that we would shoot, that I have shot, and it's an attainable bow for anybody with an incredible, there's tons of upside and very little downside for this bow. So just want to get that out there. We're giving that away to anybody. Now, for our Patreons, Patreon is a crowdfunding for creators. So it helps us pay for the show. So, I mean, the upkeep for the website, for the hosting, for all of that, any of the equipment that we're using, all of that stuff, we can make better videos, better podcasts. We can travel. We can do all of these things because of the Patreons. So the Patreons are, the number one. They're what fund this show. And so to help us out with that, you can go to patreon.com /Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. You can click on that same link where you enter to win the bow and click on Patreon. There's different tiers, but basically it's like, you can start at, it's $5 a month, 17 cents a day, and you get entered to win, with what money doesn't go back into the show or anything like that. We do giveaways. So we want to give you, the people that support us as much as we possibly can. So what we're giving away from Tacticam is giving a 5.0. So it's Tacticam, it's 4K, it'll accept a remote, and a Turkey Reaper. And so it's not legal in Michigan, but for you guys that want to hook it onto your bow or your gun in other states, it's certainly, a really cool practice. You just can't do it in Michigan. And then Tacticam says anything that you kill with that, they want you to send it into them so that they can edit it and post it up on their site. So that's super cool just in its own right. Latitude Saddles has sent us one of their classic saddles, and we said that's great. I love the classic, but you can't do anything with just a saddle. You need ropes, you need sticks, you need all that. So I've got some XOP mini sticks, and Artisan Outdoor Fabrication is given one of the platforms that I've been hunting off for the last year, the last 2 years actually, and we're going to get you set up with the ropes. So you're going to have a complete saddle package ready to hunt. We're giving that away. We work with Basemap. Basemap is like the most affordable, powerful mapping software. For the price, it's $30 for a year for the entire country. Tons of layers. It has lake information so you can see depths for right now for ice fishing. You go online, you go to basemap.com or basemap.app, and you can use code Chronicles and save 20% there. So you can get it for $24, so $2 a month for, mapping software where you may pay $30, for one state. So, it's just a great value there. I'm on the cheaper side. But they're giving away one of those pro packages with some swag, a hat, a shirt, that sort of thing. Spartan Forge, we talked about in the intro. They're giving away the same thing. So a subscription to that, yearly subscription, and a hat, shirt, all that stuff. And the guys from Zinger Fletching, 3D printed, compression fit fletchings. So, if you rip a fletch, shoot one, you just pull it off, put another one on there. No glue, no anything, super cool idea. They just changed up their design a little bit to quiet it down. I know some guys were having issues with that. We're giving away one of those. And so we do this. All that stuff is given away one quarter. So that'll be given away, the first week of April. And then we start on the next quarter, which will be more gear from Tacticam. We're going to be giving away a Beast stand. I'm going to get that ordered here in the next month. And so we'll have that when it comes down to the end of the second quarter. So our latest Patreons, my buddy Matt Dedamore here in Muskegon, Brad Collings, BDS Outdoors. So he's in Tennessee. Go follow him on social media. He's got a YouTube started up, got a Facebook. Jeff Coate in Massachusetts. Thank you so much. And Brian Barnes, I'm not sure if I hit you up last time, but I need an address. So I've got some swag packs that are going out for all my public land assassins, the guys that upgraded, the guys that are in that second tier. I've got all your beanies. I'll be sending those out here so you don't get them in the summer when it's when you don't need a beanie, right? But thank you so much to those guys. This episode came directly from the Patreons. They said, we want to learn more about self-filming. So we went out and found a self-filming guy with Garrett. Anybody that's listened to us has to know who Garrett is. Garrett Prahl, DIY Sportsman, wealth of knowledge, great guy. You guys are going to love the podcast. Thanks for listening. All right, everybody. Adam and John back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And amongst our Patreons, we asked, what do they want to hear about, guests that we've had on? I mean, we've been doing this long enough now that we're getting new listeners that haven't heard all of our earlier shows. Thank goodness. Hopefully we've come a long way. John speaks more this time, if you can believe it. But one of the questions that they had, and I think is a great topic, is self-filming. And, we dabble in self-filming. We are by no means vloggers or, not killers or any of that nature. So we you get what you get with us. But we were trying to think about who to have on. We've had people on from the industry, that side of it. And it's sometimes hard for them to, go back to starting out. And right now on the line, we've got Garrett Prahl, DIY Sportsman. I say, somebody who's gone from, self-filming to right up there close to industry quality, I would say, or he's knocking on the door. So how are you doing tonight, Garrett?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, no problem. How was that for an intro? Talk a little bit about your filming career.
Yeah, so I think my first videos that I had started taking and posting to YouTube were probably around 2005, 2006. So quite a while I've been doing it at various levels. And for the most part, it's always been kind of driven towards YouTube quality, but there's definitely a period in there where I went down the rabbit hole of, at the time, DSLRs and, more recently mirrorless cameras and the various different lenses and, prosumer and professional type of equipment, and then even dialing it back to stuff that's more easy to use as a self-filmer, because just because something is set up for good quality doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to use. I've had good friends along the way who actually have done professional video, and so I've gotten to work with, the $10,000 rigs and things like that on occasion. But certainly I think what the years have taught me is that there's things that you probably, should be doing, things that you might think you need to do, but probably don't really need to. Some things that are definitely more important than others that might be, I guess, overlooked. And then purely from the hunting aspect, little tips and tricks and things like that will definitely make your lives a lot easier when you don't have a separate person up there to film for you.
So what do you think, I guess, what was the equipment when you started out? So, I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago, but, in reality, we're talking 15 years ago. So what was the equipment like when you started out versus the options that you have today?
So when I first started off, it was a lot of mini DV tapes on cameras. SD cards are just kind of becoming a thing, and I probably couldn't afford one at the time. So I filmed on little tapes, and really the biggest difference was you had to hook up cords and things like that directly to your computer to get the files to transfer, whereas now it's obviously much easier with the realm of SD cards. But in terms of footage quality and things like that too, we didn't really have HD. There was no 4K. I guess you did have HD, but HD back then was, 720 more often. And other than that, you had your standard definition. And even your really expensive cameras back then were still shooting standard definition or 720. It isn't, till more recently that even the more expensive stuff started to get the high resolution.
So let's talk a little bit about motivation. So when you started out, I mean, where was, I guess, the industry and YouTube and social media and everything like that? because I think some people get into, I think they get into filming not necessarily for the wrong reasons, but they think it's gonna, pan out to be, the next big thing or the next YouTube sensation or something like that. So, like, what was the climate like starting out, and where did your motivations lie?
Yeah, it was definitely smaller, and really the only place that I ever shared my videos to, at least starting out, was on forums. You'd have forum discussions, and then sometimes it'd be easier to try and describe a certain thing via video than to try and type it out or do a little photo blog. And a lot of guys at the time were just starting to kind of get into the filming game and share hunts with each other. And occasionally you'd get, self-filmed hunts that would show up as little, side segments on bigger shows like Solo Hunter or something like that. But, it was definitely I think in the overall climate, it was definitely not what it is now. There was not very many channels back at the time that were doing the YouTube thing, and the ones that were, their shows, at least the ones that tried to make them like shows, it was much more similar to what you would see on TV, as opposed to videos that are much more, kind of driven now toward what we would expect out of like a YouTube style. So just definitely a different style nowadays on YouTube, what you see versus what was kind of available at the time. And I would say that for me, none of my stuff ever was kind of like the TV equivalent. It was always just kind of a smaller kind of my own thing, but I always tried to make it as, professional looking as I could within the context of what I was trying to create.
And so then how did that evolve into like your channel and kind of like what you're doing now?
Yeah, so basically, I think the first big video that I had was actually a how-to video on just a, quick, easy way to hang a tree stand and do it efficiently, climb up the tree with one trip up, as opposed to, one stick at a time and then going back down to the ground to get your second, third, fourth sticks, etc. And at the time, it was just kind of straightforward. I tried to do a good job on it. And, over the years, that's been one of the more popular videos that I had, built for YouTube. And beyond that, I just kind of started to build additional videos kind of in that same type of segment. The hunting videos were there, but they were never kind of the main thing. I'm starting to get more into the hunting videos now, but certainly I think it was the DIY type videos where I'd either build stuff or how-to videos where I explain how to do stuff that kind of really built my niche, so to speak.
And so I guess like for guys that are trying to get into YouTube or moreover just film their hunts. I mean, I guess what from doing more filming of your hunts from all of the years of I mean, one of the things that I would say that you're kind of known for is like really liking and trying and explaining gear. And I have seen the evolution with your like camera equipment and different things. So what would you say to new guys starting out trying to film their hunts? Like if you were starting today and you were telling yourself, you were asking yourself that question, how would you answer it?
On the equipment side of things, or just kind of in general,
Well,
like stylistically, what kind of scope you should be doing?
well, both. I think guys, like I said, before we got on here, is like there's a lot of analysis paralysis. There's, GoPro, whatever it is, 9 now, 10. There's 360 cameras. There's Tacticams. There's, mirrorless, DSLR, consumer, prosumer, audio, all of this other stuff. The cell phones, do a great job. And then like stylistically, what do you need? What do you really need? Do you need, 4K for, you know, depending on what you're doing? So kind of
Right.
like the entire picture.
Yeah. So what I would recommend is trying to keep it as simple as you can. And there's a bottom limit to that. A lot of times when people are kind of thinking maybe they want to start filming their hunts, they'll oftentimes throw out, well, can I just strap, a GoPro to my bow or something like that? And while, a certain level that's good because it's easy and you can focus on the hunt, generally, I think the footage quality that they might expect to get by doing something like that is probably not really what they're after. And generally speaking, the kind of the bottom limit that you probably want to get into if you want to really start to see if self-filming is something that you want to continue to do year after year would be just a basic camera arm, camcorder, preferably that has 4K capabilities and has the ability to have a shotgun microphone attached to it and a separate action cam. I'd say like those are the base, pieces of equipment that if you can keep it simple and you can get like one of those types of things, then you can piece together a pretty good story. And really, even with a basic level, lower priced equipment within those categories, it's more the skill set that you'll build as you get to learn those things more and more that'll really help make that better, more so than the equipment.
So I guess like for myself, like one of the things that, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about, but like, well, I guess before we get there, so what would that look like for you? I guess if you were setting up a gear list with a camera arm, with an action cam, with that 4K camcorder, um, I guess where would you uh, point guys?
Well, a camera that I've been pretty happy with on and I hate to say it's even like lower end because I know for some people it's going to still sound like sticker shock, like the Sony AX53. If you can find one used, I want to say you can probably find them in like the $500 to $800 range, maybe even less than that if you find a good price on it. A camera like that's going to have 4K capabilities, it's going to have great stabilization, decent low light. It's going to allow you to adjust some manual settings, which is not necessarily something you need to do, but it can help you kind of bridge the gap if you do want to get more professional down the road. And pairing that with something like a Rode shotgun microphone. I have the Rode Video Mic NTG, which I've been really happy with. But even something like a Rode Video Mic Go or something that's a little bit less expensive, still going to be fine at least to start out with and kind of learn the ropes. Camera arm wise, really I think it depends on what kind of hunting you're going to be doing. Because if you're setting up in the back 40 every time, then I would tend to lean towards maybe a little bit lower priced or bigger, bulkier, more stable camera arm. Whereas if you're more of a mobile hunter, then I would definitely lean towards more of the ultralight systems that are out there. The Fourth Arrow, uh, the Talon, or the Out on a Limb Assassin, or the Lone Wolf Custom Gear Pocket Arm. Those are going to be much more favorable from like the hunting perspective and actually toting the thing in and out of the woods. But generally speaking, with those ultralight camera arms, are not going to be as stable as something like a big muddy camera arm or something that weighs like 8 pounds. So I'd say on that side of things, it's kind of preference based off of the style of hunting that you do. Um, and then for the action camera, really, anything will do. Preferably something that has 4K. I'll explain, I guess, why in a bit. But the GoPros, you don't even have to have like the latest and greatest. If you can find an older one, or like an Osmo Action, or a 4K from Insta360. I would tend to shy away from like the $20-$30 Amazon ones because I've heard some horror stories about them just not working that great, or like, the quality control not being good. But any like name brand reputable action camera is going to be good enough at least to start with and get that second angle that you'd be looking for. So I guess like basic gear list that I would recommend to somebody who's thinking about getting into it. That's kind of what I would initially push out there. And then they can look at that and look at the price tag. And if that's like definitely on the high end of what they're expecting, then, filming can be expensive. So that'd be like a good segue to think about, like, is this something I really want to do? But on the other hand, if somebody's like, yeah, that's well within my budget, then perhaps there are options too that you could even jump right into that would be a little bit higher end than like the Sony AX53. But I think it's a good enough camera to give you really good quality and still be able to kind of learn the ropes without being, too much in debt on it.
Yeah, so one of the things I was going to ask you, and it kind of goes back to that bare bones like setup, is I want to know like how you deal with, or maybe you just are so 100% gung ho. But I know for most guys, myself and John, we end up with this like incredible burnout. So for me, like on those days, like day 6, day 7, rain days, whatever, is like I find myself, um, you know, on my phone, just getting, an interview, like walking in or in the car, getting a panoramic shot or whatever, and then I'll have like my action cam. Like we deal with Tacticam, so we've got Tacticams on our bows, and it's like I feel like at that point I'm gonna get what I get, but I think the like what you were talking about earlier, like the stylistic portion is like I know that I can build a story around what I started with, and then having that shot and that interaction. But I think that goes more into like the storytelling side of it. So, how do you deal with that burnout or that fatigue?
Honestly, it just has become kind of part of it for me by this point, but I definitely understand what you're talking about and where you're coming from because it does, especially if you feel like you're on, say, like a 7 day trip or a hunt or your vacation and it's just not going the way you'd like, and you're not that good, footage. You don't have a lot of deer on camera. It can get kind of discouraging, and you can kind of get into that mindset where it's like, man, I might as well just, I'm not going to take the camera out and film this little 15-minute interview. It's, and you kind of get, I guess, sidetracked a little bit down in the dumps. And I think part of that is just that general burnout or fatigue that can kind of creep in, not just in the filming side, but just your hunting mentality in general. And so it's always kind of good to just kind of force yourself through that. If you think it's important, go ahead, take a clip. And it's always a good idea, I think, regardless of what your storytelling method is, to at least kind of think about and visualize how you see the video going in your mind. And there's techniques that you can use in videography, like storyboarding or whatnot, that people will do more commonly with like filmmaking. But just kind of learning some of those techniques and trying to piece together how the story is going to go together and what type of clips you might want to take to help portray that story. That can be really good to think about ahead of time. And then if you're out there and you haven't gotten those clips that you're going to want to be able to tell your story, you better figure out a way to, find time to go ahead and get those segments. If you're more of like an action style, bring the viewer along for the hunt, and maybe it's a lot of cell cam interviews and quick clips, and then that paired with the deer footage and shot footage. If it's a more filmistic or like a filmic style, then maybe it's more B-roll shots, and maybe you bring a slider in your backpack and you have a shot list, and you're like, I want to get these types of shots, somewhere throughout the week so that I can use those to, put on my storyline over, some B-roll background music or something like that. So it's always good to keep in mind what your style is ahead of time so you can get clips along the way to help fill the gaps.
So, just real quick, we got to take it back to the listener that's, the new guy that's thinking, hey, can I just use a GoPro or a Tacticam on my bow? And now you're telling me that I need a shot list and I need so what about the guy that doesn't have a style, that doesn't have a camera, that doesn't have anything? I mean, is there a style that's maybe easier to start out with for guys? Or, I mean, because I
Yeah.
feel like when I started out, it was like, there's a deer, I'm going to shoot at it. And obviously, like I missed, and, I just had the worst career beginning filming hunting. It's amazing that I even still do it. But I didn't do any of that stuff because it was the third day or the fourth day or it was raining or snowing, and then so there was no style even in my thought process. So let's take it back to like, is there a style or like a thought process going into it from like day one? Like what would you tell Garrett on day one?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's easiest to just kind of ignore that when you're first starting out and just work on getting the footage, throughout the hunt, throughout the shot, and just practice that skill set because it is hard. It's hard to get footage of a deer. It's hard to make sure you're actually focusing on also getting footage, while the deer's coming in, trying to make a shot, while the deer's in frame. Like it's hard work. And to try and piece together a story on the side on top of that, there's a reason not a lot of people do it, right? So certainly I would say that skill set that comes with just being able to connect the dots and get everything done is totally fine if you're just starting out, and it'll really help you learn to try and figure out if it's something you want to continue to do or not. But then I would also encourage people to think about what it's going to look like from the viewer's perspective, and more so, who do they expect their audience to be? Are they going to be showing their friends and family? Are they going to be uploading to YouTube? Are they going to try and create like a channel that they eventually want to make like a big part of their, you know, quit their job and do it full time type of a thing? Are they trying to get in the outdoor industry? Just kind of thinking on that kind of level to figure out who's going to be my audience, and then thinking about what the footage is going to look like to them, right? Like, let's say, for example, you're just focused on getting the hunt footage, and more specifically the footage of the shot. If you turn on the camera that's attached to your bow, you draw back, you get the shot on film, and then you have some, post hunt, hero footage. And then when you play that back, you're not going to really be able to tell a story. You're just going to have that footage from basically one angle of the deer walking in, however long that takes, the shot, and then the deer runs off, and then your excitement at the end. And if that's what you want to present, then that's totally fine. But you can imagine how that doesn't really build a lot of relationship with the viewer when they're just kind of plugged into this scenario that they don't really know what's going on. They don't have the same history that you do hunting that land. They don't know what's, special or unique about that particular situation. And so thinking about that and those kind of, that perspective of what your viewer might be seeing or what they might be feeling or thinking, that can help drive, okay, maybe I need to start including clips of, X, Y, or Z also, so I can start to, put a story together around that particular hunt, because that might make the overall viewing experience a little bit more complete.
So for guys that do want to start filming and things of that nature, maybe start a YouTube channel or whatever, you said that your journey kind of started with, DIY stuff, tips and tricks, informational type stuff. One of the things, I have a ongoing conversation with one of my buddies, and it's like, we don't kill enough things on camera, or aren't engaging enough, or don't, dedicate the time to, produce a hunting video like you do, or like the hunting public, or like Shane Simpson, where you're bringing them along for each hunt, even if you don't kill anything. So for most guys that probably aren't going to start out like vlogging every day of their hunt and producing it, is there like a video, or like maybe something to start with that you'd recommend, like to get them used to editing? And because I would imagine that'd be like the worst thing, is that you go out and you shoot something, you don't have necessarily all the stuff that you need to produce that type of thing. You're going to end up with a channel with one video of just a kill and a hero shot. Like, so would you recommend like a practice video, or like to try and do some other things like leading up to actually the hunt, maybe to build that relationship or tell that story?
Yeah, there's two things that'll kind of fit the bill for that, and one of them is going to be a little bit easier. One's going to be a lot more involved. But a gear review type of a video, that's a really great opportunity where literally anybody can do a gear review video if they've had experience with, any particular product, and they can stylistically do it however they want, because there's no stress. They got all the time to be able to get the various clips and whatnot that they need. They'll be able to practice on talking to a camera. They'll be able to figure out how the audio needs to work. They can get various B-roll shots and learn kind of how their camera works and what various steps of field look like, and be able to spend as much time as they want putting those clips on the timeline and playing it back and saying, okay, this doesn't, seem how I had it, this doesn't look how I thought it was going to go in my mind, and maybe I need to film this a little bit differently or that. But the point is, you have a lot of control and a lot of time and not a lot of pressure to be able to put something like that together. And if you're not happy with the end product, then like, it's no big deal. It's not like, there's a lot riding on the completion of that particular video or having it done right, like there is with a hunt. So that would be a good one that is great for practice, but also is something that could provide, legitimate value to the people out there who are trying to learn about whatever it is that you'd be reviewing. The other one that is a little bit more involved and oftentimes still can be tied together with that one good hunt would be something that's more like a short story or a film. where you might have at the end of the day a 15-minute or a 10-minute or a 5-minute finished product, but you're telling a story and you have a script that you go through and you have a lot of, B-roll shots and footage that ties together how that story should go. And people who are really good at it can tell a great story without basically any hunt footage. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of planning, and you learn a lot along the way. It's something I've never really dove too deep into. But if you watch like some of the film submissions at, the various festivals that they play at like the ATA show, or even like just on YouTube, there's a lot of just general hunting short films. Those would be good, and a lot of times give people inspiration to try and get into filming in the first place. So just kind of look at those and, get little bits and pieces to see if that's something you might want to try and tackle. But I would say certainly for people just starting out, it would be easier to tackle something like a gear review.
Okay. And so when you were talking about equipment, you talked a little bit about like 4K and why you would need it. So when I look at 4K, obviously I see the benefit where you could be wide and you could crop in a little bit better. But from my perspective, also, like if a guy's just starting out, maybe he's, you know, it's just going to go on YouTube. It's going to be seen on a phone or I mean, I know people are watching YouTube on big TVs now, so maybe that would be one of the reasons. But also, like to try to edit 4K on just a regular old computer can be a bit cumbersome. So, what are some of the reasons that you're leaning towards 4K as a staple?
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up about the processing power that it can take. So it's something that I kind of take for granted because I've bought good enough computers to be able to handle 4K no problem over the years. So it's usually not something that's kind of at the top of my mind. But the reason that I like 4K for self filming, especially, is just what you mentioned before, is that you can stay on the safe side a little bit and stay a little bit more zoomed out, and then you have the flexibility and freedom to crop your shot in a little bit in post. And that means your framing doesn't have to be totally perfect. You can be a little bit off. The deer can be just kind of on the edge of the frame, but you're zoomed out far enough that when you go to edit it, you can crop in, 50%, or yeah, you can crop into, twice of what your main image would look like, and it still looks, if you export it in 1080, like a 1080, clip. So that's the biggest advantage for my mind. If you want to keep it in 4K, you can, and it still exports in 1080, and it's basically like super sampled 1080. It looks really good. So you can have that major flexibility there. The one thing I would add is that not every camera is going to allow you to do different frame rates in 4K. So if you want to choose 4K, you might not be able to do, say, like 60 frames per second and be able to have good like slow motion shots. So that's just something you have to keep in mind. But I oftentimes, even if I can only film in like your normal standard 30 frames a second in 4K for self filming, I usually prefer that. And then if I know I'm just going to be doing like B-roll shots or bonus footage, then a lot of times I'll put it into 60 frames a second so that I can slow it down if need be. And then the 1080 for those types of things is usually fine because you have more time to be able to set up your framing and your shot a little bit better. And you're going to not really need to have to crop in that much. And if you're going to be exporting it in 1080, which is all I ever do anyway for YouTube, then you're going to be just fine there.
So where do you land on I guess like maybe we can go into your style a little bit, but on like getting the shot on frame, does that make or break the hunt? Or does that make a decision for you whether you're going to shoot type thing?
I think it depends on overall what else you got. If you don't have much additional footage, and let's say you're trying to make a YouTube name for yourself and you don't really have an established presence yet, and that particular hunt, maybe there's not a lot of like background footage to help set the scene, and the deer comes in, you get a little bit of footage and he's off frame and you shoot, then that's a little bit different than, let's say, if you've already established a name, you got a couple people that are, kind of rooting for you a little bit, and you've built a good storyline with the beginning of the video. Then I think a lot of times, and you see this especially with the hunting public, where they can not get a shot on film, and nobody really cares because they feel like they've already had a relationship established with the people that are on the camera, and they want them to succeed. And so I guess it's kind of a tough question to answer. Ultimately, you got to decide what's more important to you. Is it more important that you know, are able to fill your tag, or would you rather get the shot on film? I tend to lean personally now towards it's not as important for me to get that shot on frame because, you know, what we do already is so hard, especially if you're, you know, hunting on public land or doing out of state trips. Like it's just not easy, and trying to film it is not easy either. And I think that in and of itself, especially to the similar minded people, there's already a little bit of rapport established there, just knowing kind of what you're doing. And so people are going to be a little bit more lenient on you, I think, if you don't get the kill shot on video. But that's, I could be totally off of that. That's just kind of how I think about it. That's also why I start running like 360 cameras and stuff, just because there's less chance that I don't get the shot on film at all.
Yeah. Like I said, I want to get into the 360 cameras and stuff here in a moment too, but I just want to know like what your style is, or kind of like where you fell on that. But since John's being awful quiet over there, I want to ask you: have you ever, you know, had your camera on one deer and then shot a different one, and haven't been able to figure that out? Because that seems to be John's MO.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Adam.
No, I don't think I've ever had that happen. Although I usually don't always have a lot of deer around me at any one time. It's usually just like one or two. Makes it a little bit easier.
Like I said, he was just being awful quiet over here. So.
Yeah, sorry, I'm off in La La Land over here. I'm thinking about all this filming and stuff because I'm heading to Florida on Wednesday, and I'm going to be on a boat for a week fishing. And Adam literally gave me a bag of gear that I got to figure out on the way down, pretty much, because I got I swear, 3 or 4 of the fisheye cameras, and then regular Tacticams, GoPro. He handed me the freaking, it's not a DSLR, but it's
the FZ300.
And I haven't even touched that camera yet, so I'm like, sweet. And then he drops off a new computer to me right now. I mean, literally, I'm leaving in a day. So, and expects me to come back with footage and get it.
Oh, I don't expect anything. It's the like what Garrett was talking about, how the viewers are rooting for us, our listeners are rooting for you, John. This is your time to shine.
Yeah.
Would this be a bad time to jump in and say how important it is to have really high level familiarity with your equipment?
No, I think that's just as important.
Right, and that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, oh man, after all the crap that I've carried the camera around now for what, 3 or 4 years, and like I said, I carried the freaking muddy. Adam's like, oh, here, you can have this one, and I swear it was like 8 pounds. I got this huge Muddy Pro, arm, and I got a camcorder that fits in the palm of my hand. And then I'm trying to go in, and I'm, I hunt just public land, like just the mobile hunter, and that definitely wasn't a mobile unit.
No, for sure. I mean, the camera sounds like it was, but certainly not the arm.
Right.
Yeah. So, like for John, he gets all my hand-me-down stuff, whatever's left over. But I think he's got a pretty good familiarity with his hunting rig right now. And these are just the Tacticam fisheyes, so they all link up to the remote, and you just push the button. But yeah, he's got a million different mounts, and I don't know what he's gonna have the setup for on the boat. So
yeah, well, it's a center console, so it will be nice to have multiple angles. I can put some on the T-tops, put some on the riggers on the back, and then like I said, I'll either have them in that time-lapse mode because you can adjust. I did download the app for it, and you can adjust it from like 5 to 10 minutes, somewhere in that area, and it'll just loop. And so then if we get a fish on, I'll have it on camera. I'll just have to remember to go back and stop it.
Yeah, you almost have to use that mode with fishing because I've even thought about how useful that could be at times, the loop mode for hunting, because then you don't have to worry about, if you got it on a 5-minute loop or whatever, you don't have to worry about it being so precise to get everything turned on when the deer walks in, which can be a challenge with lots of cameras. That's one thing I'll say too about those Tacticams is that the single remote to turn everything on and start record. I wish more companies had that functionality built in.
Well, and I like the fact that, like, with the older GoPros, and maybe the newer ones are a little bit better, but using that remote, that took battery life away from the camera, and it was sitting there thinking the whole time. And in cold weather, it was just death to, the remote and the GoPro itself. And these just used like that RF, kind of like your TV remote. So it's just micro bits of electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a thing for me. But honestly, like, I hate like the apps, whether it's GoPro or Tacticam. I don't like the remote, so I like the fact that the Tacticam is at least a little tactile. So I hit the button and it's on. So I know that I turned it on, because we've all done that. I feel like if you've filmed long enough that you didn't hit record, or you double tap the button or something,
or you hit the record button. That happened to me again this year with a nice buck. I didn't get a shot or anything, but I was just trying to get him on camera and thought I had it on camera. With the coyote, same thing. It's like, man, I guess, and this is the same camera pretty much. Well, no, you got me the G30 this year, so I was, and the button is a little bit different than the other one, but
yeah, that gear familiarity definitely is important. So I feel like this is like getting John familiar for hunting season, like for turkey season here coming up. So.
Well, we have got tons of footage of my turkey last year. We had 5 cameras going? 7.
So we have this, my father-in-law and his hunting partner killed a bird like opening day, and they had
opening morning.
Yeah, 2 or 3 cameras going, and they're in their 60s, and they managed, good enough. They did a phenomenal job for what we gave them and their level of understanding of filming or whatever. And then when we all got together to film John's, like, there's 4 cameras, I think, with the kill shot on it. It was phenomenal, but now there's too much to edit. It's like, how do you put that all together? So we're saving that one for this year for production.
Yeah, and kind of even there's almost like an inverse relationship between how easy it is to get the footage and how easy it is to edit the footage. Because you can, like you said, you can have 5 different action cameras running at the same time, and you have a pretty good chance of getting the footage that you want to get on one of those cameras at least. But then there's so much work in editing, and if you're in a workflow where you're hunting every day and then you're dumping footage every day and trying to get a video exported essentially every couple of days, that can be a lot to go through. Whereas like that single camcorder with a big giant battery on it and just one SD card, even though it gives you you're a little bit more it's a little bit more critical to get all the footage on that camera. It's a little bit tougher. The editing for it is so much easier because you basically just have like one card that you can dump all of your footage on, and then it's all organized already. So it's basically that much less time in editing that you have to go through and line everything up. And so, yeah, there's definitely a balance there.
Well, and I know you're on a lot of those, the same self-filming groups and, film your hunt type groups that I am on Facebook as well. And, the same group, the same question every day is, what's the best editing software, the best free editing software, the best cheap editing software? And so where would you steer guys in that to answer that question?
I think the best free one out there is probably DaVinci Resolve. I downloaded that for a little bit and played around with it when I was contemplating getting the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. And it's pretty powerful for what you get. There's a couple of features that you're not going to be able to access without paying for the pro version. But you're talking about stuff like, video denoising and things that you probably really wouldn't if you were an entry-level guy wanting to use anyway. So that's kind of what I would probably steer people towards if they're looking for a free software to be able to try out. And there's lots of tutorials on how to use it on YouTube.
Yeah, they even have like the how-to videos in the actual app or the program.
Yeah.
'Cause that's when I have that on the big tower computer that Adam brought over and dumped here. And he's like, "Here, download this." And I actually did one video on that. I did my perch cooking video, and it was definitely a learning experience. And then we were having some issues with the card or the
Exporting.
exporting it and everything. And then Adam's running, Apple. So then it's like, okay, sending the stuff from from my my computer over to his. It was just kind of kind of a pain for I'm an old guy, so
So what is it that you're using to edit?
I'm using the Premiere Pro CC from Adobe.
Okay. And I guess what would be are you just not a Mac guy, or because it seems to be like either whatever that, what is it, like the Pro Tools or Adobe, like those seem to be like the main two.
Yeah, I've never really used a Mac like throughout my life. So that's part of it, is just a familiarity thing. And obviously they cost a lot more for the same amount of power from a processing standpoint. So I know that Macs are obviously very popular for people in the the artistic realm, video and photo and things like that. But I just never have gotten familiar enough to want to go down that route. So I've always been a PC guy and have used Adobe Premiere. Let's see, they have one below Premiere Pro, Premiere Elements, I think. I got some exposure to that in high school. And because I had that exposure, I ended up getting the collegiate priced license of CS6 for Premiere Pro in college. And then I stuck with that for several years until it finally just got outdated enough that I finally upgraded to CT. So it's basically a familiarity thing more than anything for me.
Okay. And now you'd mentioned earlier about like why you were using, or why it's fun to use the 360 cam, and I've seen you using that more and more. Um, I know nothing about those, and it seems like pretty cool, but again, like it seems like the editing would be kind of daunting because you have to know. Like I don't know anything about it, so what can you tell us about the 360 cams and their value?
Well, they're really easy to get footage, but they're much harder on the editing side. And certainly some of the apps make it easier. Like the camera that I have is an Insta360 camera, and all the Insta360 cameras have pretty good software through their apps where they can stitch the footage from the two lenses together, and you're able to apply keyframes pretty easily and crop footage and zoom, and they even have some little stylistic things that are kind of pre-made plug and play with your footage that you can use. But it's definitely not as straightforward as just dragging a clip onto your timeline and just trimming it to your desired length and then moving on to the next one. The way the 360 cameras work is that they have those two lenses and they're each recording simultaneously, and then as you're recording, the camera's taking in all that information, and you have your two footage clips, but there's also a bunch of data that goes along with that clip. Once you drag and drop those files to the computer, which tend to be pretty large files, then within your software, you have to stitch those two videos together. And the computer does that for you using the data and the two video files. But then you're able to go ahead and, recrop and reframe and apply keyframes to basically take that spherical view and show the footage that you want to show when you want to show it, and then export your final clip. So it's almost like you have to edit before you edit. In a certain sense, you got to edit your 360 footage to get the framing that you want, and then you take that exported clip and then you drag that onto your timeline. At least that's my workflow for it.
And so would you say that's like a more advanced type thing, or would you say that would be, a benefit over just a regular point of view cam for somebody starting out, in addition to a main camera of some sort?
I'd say it can definitely be beneficial, primarily from the aspect that it captures everything. If you got the computer that can handle the files, then really the only disadvantage over an action camera is that your footage quality isn't going to be quite as good. Because if you are running a 360 camera, let's say that records in 5.7K, which sounds pretty good, that's really split between the two lenses. So at the end of the day, you're ending up with like a 1080p quality crop of any given place that you angle that camera. Whereas if you were filming the same thing with like a GoPro at 4K, if you were to crop in, you're going to see a little bit higher resolution image with that 4K action camera than you would with the 360 camera. So really the biggest advantage there is that you're kind of hedging your bets that you can really film everything. And there's some creative things that you can do with it too, like the invisible selfie stick and things like that. But so certainly if there's a creative aspect to why you'd want to have a 360 camera, there's some things you can do with those you just simply can't do with other cameras. But if you're just looking for it from the aspect of being able to film everything, then you can. It's just a little bit harder to work with it after the footage is captured.
Okay. So I guess along the gear side of it, like going back to that guy that's just starting out and that he's overwhelmed, looking at all this stuff that's out there, and we've talked about a bunch of different cameras, a bunch of different options, benefits, all the other things. Like, what would you say is maybe like the most overrated or overhyped piece of like filming equipment, and maybe like the most underrated and something that you would not want to overlook but often is?
I'd say underlooked. I'll start with that one first. I think it's a little bit easier. And it's not probably underlooked for everybody, but definitely for certain people, I think it is. And it's just audio in general, but more specifically audio on whoever it is that you're trying to film. If you're just filming a hunt, then certainly a shotgun mic is going to be a huge asset, one that has a good windscreen on it, so you're not going to get a lot of wind noise. But then also, if you have some kind of a lavalier mic on your person, on your body where you have that thing clipped on pretty close to your collar, then that's going to make your talking into the tree or talking into the camera footage when you're in the tree or on the ground, especially if you're not right next to the camera, it's going to make that audio sound a whole lot better.
That's what I was kind of worried about. I mean, coming up on this fishing trip, if I'm going to be talking and stuff, it's like I'm going to be out on the boat in the wind, and I don't even know how well these fisheye cameras are going to be for sound.
Yeah, I messed with them when we were ice fishing, and they actually do pretty good. But I think the wind is going to be definitely an issue. But I think with the other videos that I've done with fishing and things, and essentially I know you pay more attention to like, the South Florida Fishing Channel, Gale Force Twins, like Deer Meat for Dinner, where they're like telling a story. I mean, when I was doing it, it was just all of like the fast striking. Like if you watch like bow fishing videos, it's just like music and then all the stuff. So
right, yeah, but
but you'll have another camera to
right.
if you want to do that, or you
could have to do some voiceover or something. But because when I'm watching those videos, I'm trying to learn, like because obviously I'm not down in Florida, but once a year, maybe, and I want to, I'm renting a boat and I'm going to be out there fishing for a week straight, and I want to learn as much as possible from the people that are out there doing it, and so, and then my point of view of like my kind of storyline, what I'm thinking about going down there is like a northern guy going down to South Florida and fishing for a week, doing it himself on a boat, and then trying to, I got some old downrigger rods, all this stuff from, our big lake fishing, which I'm trying to integrate into the saltwater. So, that's my storyline. Like, so that's what, I want to be able to kind of put that in.
Well, lucky for you, we've got an expert on the line to say, hey, how would you go about doing doing the audio on something like John just outlined?
Well, how many people potentially would there be that you would want to hear what they have to say?
Explain it again. What do you mean?
So who's going to be doing the talking?
Oh, just me.
Okay. So what I would do, and this is where, you can definitely increase the work required to be able to edit the video, but the quality is going to be a lot better, is I would have a not a wireless even. I would just have a recorder that you can have in like a chest pocket, and then just have a lav mic with like a big furry windscreen over it clipped onto your collar
Right.
and just have that thing running all day. If you have one of your cameras that has the ability to take a mic input, like a 3.5 millimeter mic input, then something like a Rode Wireless Go, where you can have that audio wirelessly transmitted right into the camera, makes life so much easier, because then you don't have to take the audio from your recorder and figure out how it aligns with the footage that you have from your various cameras,
Right.
especially if you have multiple cameras. If you got 3 different action cameras running, and then you just have audio that's recorded in your pocket, and then you have those various action cameras are taking clips at different times, and they're splitting the clips in 4-minute intervals, and the other one's splitting clips in half-hour intervals, and then you're trying to get that all to line up with your audio. It can be really tough and time consuming. So if you're going to have everything just running, then you can kind of ease that a little bit by doing like a clap at the beginning to make a set point where you can align all your clips to.
Right.
But if you're just going to be doing like loop mode on all your cameras, and then you catch a fish, then you go around and hit the button on all of your cameras, it's going to be not impossible, but it's going to be, I think, tough. So if you have the ability to have audio that goes right into one of those cameras at least, then that's going to make your editing a little bit easier.
All right. We'll have to look into that.
Well, we have the ability to do all of that. Like, that's the thing. And that's, I guess the learning curve that John and I have gone through, or that I've gone through.
You should just come down, Adam. I know you hate fishing, but you could just be the cameraman and the freaking, then you could like post or edit the videos and get them out while we're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really budget for that in my timeline this year. Not that I wouldn't love to, but and that's kind of the great information here, is that like I'm trying to, like kind of curb the timeline, or, when you talk about that budget, like that $500 to $800 camera, might be, like you said, sticker shock to somebody, except for the fact that, we have 4 GoPros and mics and recorders and, a bunch of, $100, $200 cameras that, we've gone through all of this working up to, kind of stuff that we really want to work with at this point. So, we have drawers and drawers and drawers full of cameras and mics and wires and batteries and all of that. So, anything that we can do like on this podcast, kind of one and done, the guy starting out, I think is incredibly helpful.
And I would almost say that, if it came down to, you could spend whatever money you have on one camera, or you could spend less money in the camera and spend a little bit more on like the audio equipment too. It's kind of like a rifle on your optics, right? They always say, spend as much as you can on your optics, and then, whatever's left you buy the gun with. It's kind of the same type of deal with video, where audio is important enough that, because if you have a video where it's just like a bunch of wind noise, nobody's going to watch it. It's just going to be tough to, stick through it. But if you have a good audio, then that can override bad footage in some scenarios. And if it comes down to it, yeah, you can spend less money on a camcorder and spend a little bit more on audio equipment. But the challenge is, if you get too low in price in the camcorder, then it's not going to really have the capability to have like audio inputs. So you have to, that's where kind of that little minimum like threshold comes in, where I think if a guy's serious, you probably want to get a camcorder that at least has a 3.5 millimeter mic input. And if you have that, then a system that works pretty well is an audio splitter, where you can have just your 3.5 millimeter, mic input, and that splits off into 2 cables, one that goes into your left channel, one that goes into your right channel. One of those can go into a shotgun mic. The other one can go into a wireless lavalier mic, like the Rode Wireless Go. And then you're able to simultaneously get audio from the shotgun mic and also your lavalier mic that's, sitting in your chest pocket. And so you can choose, because it's separate tracks, you can go in your editing and you can choose, I'm just going to delete the shotgun mic because all I care about is the guy talking right here. Or you can say, all I got is, breath noise on this clip, so I'm just going to delete that track and just stick with the shotgun mic. Or you can have them both running, and it kind of gives you a more immersive type of a sound experience. That's the system that I run on I have a Sony AX700 that I run. It's just like basically a step up in the AX53. But you could do the same thing with an AX53 style of camera, or probably most cameras that would offer just that 3.5 millimeter mic input. And then if you have somebody else to do the filming for you, then it's really easy to have just that main camera rolling and it's got great audio and you're getting all the clips that you want to get. And then your action cameras are just kind of getting B-roll and you don't even have to worry about the audio on those because it's not really important. But if you don't have that, primary source and you're trying to capture everything through just action cameras, then that's where it gets a little bit trickier to have good audio and also not just be a total nightmare in editing.
Well, when you talk about good audio superseding like mediocre video or just okay, I think that's what this podcast is built on. Is we made sure that we had good audio because we knew that we didn't know what we were doing when we got started, but we figured if people could stick it out and listen, then maybe they would get to know our personalities and
that. Like I only say a few words at a time, so you really got to be good at catching that shit. So.
But that's what we kind of focused on was the audio portion on this. So, I mean, I totally get that, and I think one of the things that I know we've had people talk about it, but like John's wife is like, why are they always whispering? Like, why? Like it's audio here, audio there, audio here, and that's something that with hunting shows is very difficult. And then when you're watching elk hunting, it's the worst because you have super high pitched and then super whisper. Like, oh my gosh, terrible.
Yeah, it's like when I told the born and raised guys, my wife freaking hates you, and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, because I stay up all night listening to you're watching your videos, and all of a sudden a bugle gets ripped off after you guys been whispering.
And so I guess like that overrated piece, what do you think would you not necessarily have to, if you're going to spend your money on the audio, spend your time on the audio, what's something that you could, maybe gets talked about a lot, but maybe isn't as important.
I think from somebody like me who does a lot of research into like cameras and camcorders and stuff, even if I'm not planning on buying it, I like window shopping. I think the amount of money that you can spend on a camera can be overrated, where you might be able to look at a camera that has all the specs that you would love to have in a video camera, and you might even know how to use all the functionality that it comes with. But at the end of the day, if you know how to get good footage quality with a lesser priced system and you do your job as a filmer, then the audience is not going to know the difference. So I would say like between that and maybe for the mobile hunting crowd, maybe the camera arm, like total weight, where everybody's just kind of racing toward like the lightest weight camera arm, that can be balanced with like, too much flex sometimes in an arm. So if you're only looking at like what the arm looks like on paper, then that can be a little bit overrated. Sometimes you got to be able to see if it's also going to function with like the camera weight that you have. Because a lot of times whatever weight rating they put on a camera arm is not necessarily what it's going to have stable footage with, but more so like what the thing can physically carry. So there's a little bit of a disconnect sometimes there. But I would say probably more than that is just how much video capability you really need.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really important because that's what everybody's chasing is, how light, how packable, how...
I just want the simplest freaking camera.
Yeah, simplicity, I think, trumps everything, really.
Well, yeah, looking at that, you brought that camera over and I was like looking at it and like, I have no clue what all these freaking buttons are. I'm like, I hope I don't. I'm like, I'll probably be in like memory mode or some shit trying to freaking... and I'll be deleting shit. But no.
Yeah, it makes it tough when you can have like the best camcorder in whatever category you're in, and then you also pick like the best action camera in whatever category you're in, and then you pick the best 360 camera, and then you pick up a gimbal type of a thing, and you have like the best of like whatever each of those individual categories is. And then the things don't talk to each other, and it's a lot of work to get individually all of them working at the same time when you're on a hunt. Versus something like the Tacticam, where you could argue like, yeah, maybe the footage quality isn't, as on par with like a camcorder setup, but the ease of use has, with that singular remote, there's something to be said there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for most guys, and I've had, we've had some conversations about it on some other podcasts and stuff, but is like it kind of even comes down to like where that weight thing is. Like you could have the lightest setup in the world, but if it's super cumbersome to set up, or I'd rather have a little bit more weight and a little bit easier ease of use, or like you were talking about on the camera arm too, like maybe just a little bit more stable, you know, to have that experience of being, fluid and seamless, getting everything set up, then, I mean, we didn't really touch on any of it at this point, but for a beginner, a full DSLR with interchangeable lenses and stuff is probably a little bit cumbersome out of the box for, someone starting out.
Yeah. Unless they want to get into photography too, then they're going to benefit from learning from that type of a system. But
yeah, and that's one thing. One of the other questions I don't think we've got. I think we covered pretty much a lot of the things that I wanted to cover. But one of our listeners, he wanted to know, like, as far as like a mirrorless or a DSLR setup for someone who did want to get into photography or would take good pictures. Did you have a recommendation for like a good solid kind of starter camera there?
That's a tough one because there's so many out there right now that are all good, and the rate at which they pump out new mirrorless cameras right now is so fast. I mean, it's like one or two a year from each company, that what you had 3 years ago, 5 years ago even, is still going to take fantastic photos. I think where some of the biggest gains are being made right now is on the video side of things, where you take some of the best mirrorless cameras right now, and the video ease of use and functionality that they have is light years ahead of what was available 5 years ago. But on the photography side of things, I mean, the people that are really into photography can nitpick on various little, microscopic things, but they're not nearly as, I mean, taking a photo isn't as hard as getting good video, in my opinion. And maybe that'll, get some photographers out there angry at me, but generally with a photo, you have a little bit more time to set up your composition and everything, and you can kind of get everything to look how you want to look. And then you take a raw photo and you got all the time in the world to edit the colors on that photo. Whereas video, sometimes you just got to get it right in the field. And so I think that's where it's maybe a little bit more flexible on the photography side of things. I got a Sony NEX 5R from several years ago that I don't even think I could sell used right now because it's so obsolete. But I paid like probably $400 for it at the time, and it's an APS-C style sensor, which is much bigger than the sensors on most of the camcorders that we're talking about. And it's got interchangeable lens, works with the Sony E-mount system, and it takes great photos. Arguably not as good as some of the photos from the $2,000 systems that you can buy new right now, but in the hands of a skilled photographer, the person looking at the photo is not going to be able to tell much of a difference, especially on a platform like Instagram or something like that.
Okay. So, before we let you go here, John always has a question, but before we get into that, I just wanted to say, so we're also working with Spartan Forge, and so I figured since you are working with them as well, and you put out the video, and you've been kind of going through putting it through its paces, so what is your take on that whole platform? It's super interesting and really cool, but for us, he launched it right around like the rut time, so everything was like, peak movement, outside of their normal area, so it was somewhat seemed predictable.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I think the thing that's most intriguing about it is the way that the data is put together is just not like anything else that's out there right now. Everything else for the most part is based off of observational data from people that oftentimes, might have a more controlled environment, or maybe just not as broad of a depth across the country. I talked to Bill and he shows me some of the data. Deer in the South don't do things the same way that deer in the Midwest would. And so it's tough to have one platform without having all of that regional data. to be able to look at, to be able to make just kind of broad generalizations about deer across the country. And there's certainly times when whatever your prediction says is going to happen is kind of intuitive, but then there's also other scenarios where the app might say something that I'm not expecting. Maybe there's a cold front and that first day after says it's going to be low activity day or core movement. And I'm like, well, that doesn't quite sound right. And then I go out there and it kind of reflects, for whatever the reason was, the movement just wasn't there. I could think of one day in particular that happened this year. The trail cameras were dead. I didn't see anything. My wife didn't see anything. Big cold front had moved through. It should have been just ideal conditions. And the app said low activity. And that's, what basically, bore out that day. So it's definitely interesting. And I think it's cool that Bill is pretty transparent about like what it can and can't do, and just how accurate you can like expect an app to be when you're, working with wild animals.
Well, I also like the fact that, through all of the like actual collared deer studies and everything, but it's still ongoing. Like it's a living thing. And like the more they get, the better it is, so it isn't just, based on, like you said, observational or like thumb in the air type stuff. I mean, it's completely evolving.
Yeah. And they have enough data now. And some of this stuff I've talked to Bill pretty in depth about. They have enough data now that for what's presented on the app, like it can get maybe a little bit more accurate with more and more data, but it's already like very accurate compared to what you might expect would be the upper limit. And so as we get more and more data, then you're going to start to be able to see things that are maybe more specific, right? Like perhaps, a certain subset of deer, a certain region of the country with more data comes in, that particular region might get more accurate, or a subset of the deer data might show slight differences, to where, yeah, like that specific area might have a little bit different reading than it would have before. But I think overall, it's like you said, it can only get better. It's probably not going to get worse. It shouldn't get worse based on the methodology. And it's
Right.
already pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I just thought it was, worth mentioning because, we can say, give our opinion on it, and there's not a whole lot of people that are really out there, testing it out, and going through the paces in which you normally go through things. So I thought it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, I definitely think it's pretty cool, and I'm excited to see, when the second portion of it comes out, where they got the wear feature. So,
So I think I've asked you this question before, but so what is your bow setup? What bow are you shooting, and arrows? What's your whole setup?
bow is, I think, TBD for this year. Last year I shot the Gearhead. Year before that I shot the new breeds and had shot Bowtech prior to that. But this year I'm thinking I might try out 2 or 3 and just kind of shoot them throughout the summer, and then just get rid of whichever ones I don't, think is the top one. But I've been looking at the V3 from Matthews, the V30 from Expedition, and the V30 from Gearhead. Those are kind of my top 3 right now that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And I'll basically have whichever one it is probably set up at either 70 or 75 pounds, but 29.5-inch draw. That gives me, plenty of energy to throw a little bit heavier arrows and still have, speeds in the 265 to 275 range.
Yeah.
And probably my arrow setup is going to be, I think, around 535, 540 grains this year. It was closer to the 510 last year at like 16 or 17%. But I wanted to try out those Iron Will solid wides, and they only come in 150 grain and up, whereas before I had shot the 125 grain. So my overall arrow weight's going to get a little bit heavier just from that aspect. But I think I'll still be able to have very similar speeds to what I had last year.
Cool.
So that's pretty long, or maybe average draw length, but all of those bows are short axle to axle with the 30s. I mean, I guess with the gearhead, that's a long gearhead, but for a standard bow, 30 inches axle to axle is on the smaller side. Is there a reason why you're?
Did you say the 29 in the V3 or the 31?
31.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. So, well, that and like with the Matthews, I mean, even at the 31 inch, the way the
Cams are.
yeah, the cams are so big, the angle coming off the top of the cam at full draw, it's actually like more than
Mhm.
my one of my 32 inch axle bows or 33.
Yeah, I mean, kind of my thought process was I wanted more maneuverability because I can't predict always what kind of a scenario I'm going to get into, whether I'm going to be tucked into deadfall or climbing a tamarack tree that's got branches going everywhere, or if I'm just going to be kind of out in the open. Like it's just a mix of scenarios. And so there's certainly an advantage there to having a little bit shorter axle to axle bow. Last year I shot the 24 inch, which was what I felt like at the time was probably the shortest bow that I could go and still have a string angle that I was comfortable enough with that I could still be reasonably accurate. And that was definitely the case. I mean, I could shoot that bow at 80 on a good day and shoot as good as any other bow that I've shot. But it did take a little bit of work to finally get there. It was, I had to get my draw length absolutely spot on. I used one of those bigger nose buttons to make the string angle a little bit less acute. And so as I hunted with it, I was kind of thinking and evaluating each setup to, what's the biggest bow I could get by with in this particular setup? And a lot of the times you'd be in setups where it doesn't really matter. I could get by with a 38 inch or a traditional bow or whatever, but then there'd be those certain scenarios where it was definitely, it was definitely favoring the shorter bow. Anytime I sit flat on the ground, then I think the max for me is like 32, and that's just barely cutting it. Like if there's any uphill at all, then my cam's at risk of hitting the dirt. So 32 is like, I have no desire or reason ever to get a bow longer than that for my torso length. So the 30 kind of seemed like it was maybe a good balance there where I get a little bit of forgiveness off of like the max that I'm willing to shoot if I'm hunting on the ground, but it still gives me a little bit more forgiving of a string angle than the 24 did. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, it was just kind of about striking that balance for me.
Okay. The only reason I asked and brought it up because they were all shorter to axle bows, and I know that you put a lot of thought, and everything is well thought out in what you do. And I know Troy, the ranch fairy, and he was just on social media bashing all over short bows and how they were terrible. So I just thought I'd ask. But where can everybody follow along with everything that you're doing, or if they want to follow up with questions or anything, how can they find you?
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is DIY Sportsman, and that's where I put most of my content up on. But probably the easier place to get a hold of me if you have like questions about anything would be either my Instagram page, which is DIY_Sportsman, or the Facebook page, DIY Sportsman. And messaging me through there is usually going to be a little bit, easier, quicker to get a response. Because honestly, with the comments on the YouTube channel, like I try to, read and respond to all of them, but sometimes I just miss them. And then, I still post stuff to the social media accounts too, but certainly the bulk of the content I would say is YouTube driven.
And then you still have a podcast?
I do, yes. On the Sportsman's Nation podcast network, I have my own podcast. So you can either find that by searching the Sportsman's Nation, or you can actually just search DIY Sportsman podcast and it'll pop up as well.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking the time and chatting with us, and trying to warm up over there with the negative temps.
Yeah, I think we'll get above freezing in like another week maybe.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we got for this evening.
All right, sounds good.